Hi everyone, I thought I'd put together a quick video on not a content one this time, but more a process video on how to annotate and plan questions in assessments for business management. Um, this is really important for stopping silly little mistakes. So you've done all the hard work and you're still losing marks because you're just not giving the assessor the information that's required. So here's just a couple of things we can practice to go through. Okay, so the first thing is, what is annotating? So we're going to start with annotating and I'll give you some examples and then I'll go through to planning out your answer. So annotating is the process of taking complex information, usually within a practice question or an actual question if it's the assessment, and simplifying it down into its key parts. This is the key idea here. Okay, and then why do we annotate? Well, it forces you to slow down your responses and ensure you answer the question exactly as asked. Okay, so quite often we're guilty in a response of seeing some keywords that we've heard before and jumping straight into your answer. But sometimes we make silly little mistakes there. So this is just a way that we can make sure that we're doing exactly what the question is asking. Okay, so the first type of question I'm going to practice annotating for are case study questions. All right, and here's an example case study for ABC that you may have seen in your practice questions. Okay, so the question is, describe one transition issue or one entitlement issue the ABC would need to consider in relation to the 200 staff leaving. Okay, so annotating, don't forget, is just simplifying this question down. There's a lot going on in this question, and there's a lot of areas that we can make some mistakes. Okay, so the first area that we want to annotate is the task word here. Now, describe is more than a definition. Okay, so that's our first kind of clue. So if I was annotating, the process to do that is you circle the key bit that you want to annotate, and you're going to go, well, this is what I would write, def plus feet. That's a little just reminder for you. That's right. When I describe something, I've got to give the definition and then an additional feature. Right? So this is what we're doing. We're just taking what's written down here and simplifying it to make sure we do exactly what's correct. The next thing, and I know it's the next word and it sounds a bit silly, but it's one transition issue. So that's important. So I might, because it features both transition and the word entitlement, I might think I need to do both. Okay, no, I've just got to do one of them and not both. Okay, so I would actually just circle this word. Whenever you see the word or and, I would always just highlight my attention to that. Okay, so I don't need to talk about both transition and entitlement. I just need to talk about one of them. All right, great. Then when we go down, we read the rest of the question. The ABC would need to consider in relation to the 200 staff leaving. You know from doing the or that you're going to talk about either a transition issue, as my cat comes through the cat door, either a transition issue or an entitlement issue. And so based on your knowledge of the information and what's in the case study, hello buddy, and what's in the case study, let's get it put it down, you're going to pick which one you're going to do, okay? And so, yeah, I'm not going to circle or highlight both of these things. I'm only going to do the one I'm going to talk about. And so let's say there was something in the case study that alluded to counselling offered by ABC or something. Okay, well, that's a bit of a hint that they want you to talk about transition issues. So if that was the case, I'm circling that, doing an arrow, and I'm just going to put down like what I'm going to kind of, what's that all about? Yeah, and a transition issue are the things that are voluntary for the business to do. Okay, and that way I'm not going to mix up and accidentally talk about entitlement issues. All right, and then the final thing I'm going to look at here that is important for me to dig out is the fact that it is a case study question. All right, now as I've told you guys, when the business name or a person from the case study is mentioned in the question, then you know there's marks allocated to actually referencing to the case study. All right, so that for me is just case study. Yep, don't forget when I write about this and when I go to my answer planning, which we're going to do a bit later, I've got a plan to write about the case study in there. So straight away, you've just simplified this question for Give me a definition and feature of one transition issue, and then say how the ABC is going to do that. You're essentially putting this question into your own words. Okay. All right, let's move on to another example. This next annotating example is double task word questions. Okay, so this is a much more complex version of the question we just had before. And you'll notice there's actually 3 task words in this particular question. All right, now I'm not going to go through the whole process like I did before because the second half of this is exactly the same. But what's really important is I see that there are 3 task words in here plus a case study reference. Okay. Now the process here when we get to answer planning, which I'll talk about a bit later, is, well, there's 4 things this question is asking me to do. It's asking me to identify something. It's asking me to justify something. It's asking me to describe something. And it's asking me to link it to the case study. Well, there's 4 things there, and look, there's 4 marks. So by the process of annotating, you can make it so much simpler in what this question is actually asking you to do. And that's why knowledge of these task words is really, really important, because you can quickly scan the question and be like, oh, okay, 3 task words plus case study. Oh, it's just 1 for each. Easy peasy. Moving on to explain questions. Okay, now don't forget what explain requires you to do. Explain requires you to show the relationship between one thing or another, how one thing can affect another thing. Now, what I want you to do whenever you see an explain question on the annotating is break those 2 things that you're linking down into a simpler form. So there's going to be 2 things here. In this instance, there's actually 3, but there's going to be relationships here. So what is the thing, and this is the first question I want you to ask, what is the thing that's causing the change? And then the second thing, what is the effect of the change? And you can see here when we go, okay, explain, okay, that's a relationship, cause and effect, how the performance management strategy of self-evaluation can achieve both employee and business objectives. Okay. So you can do this a number of different ways. You can just circle the cause and do a little C, and then you can cause, and now it's how self-evaluation can achieve employee objectives. So that's an effect on employee objectives and an effect on business objectives. And then you know that I've got to do, tell me what self-evaluation is, 1 mark, how that affects employee objectives, 2 marks, and business objectives, 3 marks. Another way you might want to visualize that when you're scribbling on your paper is you might go, in this case, SE for self-evaluation, DEF, and then how it achieves employee objectives and business objectives, not how it achieves BO. Isolation smells. All right, now we're going to move on to answer planning. This is not something you're going to do for every question, okay, because you won't have time. I want you to annotate every question, all right, break those keywords down and those key task words down so you're very clear on what you need to do, but you're not going to plan out every question because that's just going to soak up too much of your time. I want you to do this for questions of 4 marks and above. Okay, so if you've got a question that's 4 marks or above, it's generally going to take up a couple of task words, which is really hard to do in your head. And there's going to be multiple demands for the question. And that's really hard to do in your head and make sure you actually address all areas of the question. So here, all we're trying to do is find out where the marks are coming from. Now, this is pretty easy in the examples that I'm giving you here, but in the exam at the end of the year, there's a 10 marker, right? There's no way you can do that in your head. So you must plan this answer out, much like your English teachers ask you to do for your essays. Okay, so with case study questions, how are we going to plan this out? So you're going to first annotate your question, and we're going to break the rule that I told you before about 4 marks and above, but I wanted to do a simple one just to prove the point. So you've already annotated this question, and then planning, guys, it's just in the margins of your paper or above the question or whatever you want to do. You're just going to dot point where the marks are coming from. Okay, so your first one here is, okay, what did we do before? I think we did a transition issue, didn't we? Yep, so I'm going to desk, which is describe or whatever shorthand you want to do, transition. TRI. That's what I would do. Transition issue. It's just shorthand. Yeah, just very, very simple. And don't forget, this is going to be for a bigger question of 4 marks and above. So when you go back going through this, you want to make sure you can understand it. And then the second mark is going to come from the case study. So what are we going to link to the case study? Well, we talked about counselling, didn't we? Please, in your plan, don't write just case study, okay? Because that's actually not helping you when you've got a really big mark question. Let's pretend we've got an 8-mark question here, right? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You've got 8 things that you need to cover off here. If for these, you've just written like case study, case study, case study, that's actually not going to speed you up at all. Okay, the idea is you have this reference on one side of the page and you're essentially checking them off as you go. So here, right, I'm going to describe a transition issue. Cancelling, yep, done. Tick, you can tick it, you can cross it out, you can do whatever you want. Right, then, okay, I look down to my my margin. Right, that's right, I'm going to link it to what ABC is doing for counselling. Write that. Cool, done, next, bang. And the idea is you have less time doing this and more time actually writing. The idea is to compress the thinking time up front of the question, so then when it gets to writing, you're just writing the whole way through. And then we have odd mark allocation questions, okay? So this can be sometimes a bit tricky because normally it's either an even amount of marks or, especially with case study questions, it can be hard to figure out where they come from, all right? So we're going to annotate as we normally do, but here we've got 3 things that we need to talk about. Task word is compare, so that's a hint. And you guys should know compare are similarities and differences. And so when we see compare, we should go straight to how many marks it is, and that's how many similarities or differences you need. You could have 1 similarity and 2 differences. You could have 2 differences and 1 similarity. It won't matter, yeah, as long as you've got that combination. So when you've got an odd mark allocation, look to the task word, and that should help you on what you need. Now here, I'm not just going to write similarity and differences or S&D. I'm actually going to write 1 or 2 words for each of these, which similarity or difference I'm going to talk about. All right, so guys, hopefully that was helpful. If you need to go over this again, please do, but I want you to practice doing this in your practice questions so you don't need to think about doing it in your assessments. So don't forget, we're annotating every question and we're planning questions 4 marks and above. Awesome. Thanks, guys.